Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Renita Osborne. I'm with Fidelity National Home Warranty and Disclosure Source. And today we've got Laurel House, and she's our Regional Vice President of Disclosure Source, NHD. She enjoys being a sales executive for over 25 years now, and she helps the brokers and agents understand the disclosures and the permits and NHDs and all of that. Laurel also is certified CAR trainer. She's gotten her training for CAR, so she knows these forms and stuff that we're going to be dealing with. And she's been doing great education for our company here. So I'd like to introduce Laurel's our VP again, Disclosure Source. So Laura, go ahead and take it over.
Thank you, Renita. Well, it's a pleasure to be with all of you and this morning, and thank you for your valuable time. Hopefully you'll find some really good nuggets in the presentation today and helpful information. I also have a brand new video from CAL FIRE that they've created based on attending quite a few of my classes, so I want to share that with you as well. We're going to, if you don't mind, it looks like everybody's muted themselves. Thank you for that, because you know how Zoom is, but it can be kind of interruptive if you've got, like my dog, I'm hoping she doesn't bark during the class. But anyway, thank you for that. And Renita is going to watch the chat. And if you have questions, please put those in the chat. And at the end, I will put my email and phone number in the chat, so you can reach out to me if you have any additional questions later that come up. All right, so to get started, whoops, well, my little thing is trigger happy. So when you receive a natural hazard disclosure from Disclosure Source, we provide you with two maps. The first map is called the statutory or state map. And this is the map that drives whether or not your seller is going to need to fill out the FHDS form. The local maps give greater transparency to a buyer of what might have been mapped locally, but they are not what drives whether or not your seller needs to use the FHDS. So just remember that. We wanted to make it as easy as possible for your buyer to read this report and understand what zones they fall in for their particular parcel, what they might be looking at for insurance purposes and so forth. But we are not an insurance carrier, and we can't tell you whether or not you can get insurance. But the report does tell you it's in a zone or it's not in a zone. If you see at the bottom, you see those boxes with the X marks, yes or no. If it's in a zone, it's in it, whether it's high or very high or wildland fire. Next to whatever it's in, you'll see a red asterisk, and that's going to ask you to please see that page for more information. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to review a report and any particular portion of the report with your buyer with some interactive ways that we make it very easy. If you don't see any box checked, that's because they haven't mapped it either through the state or through the local jurisdictions. Right now, the state is updating their fire maps. They're in the process, so we should see some changes within the next month or two. And when they do update it, of course, we'll automatically update it in our report as soon as those maps change. So just know that that's coming down the pike. So another thing we've added, because when they changed the residential purchase agreement the last time, they changed the verbiage that said that delivery of documents can be through links. Links are now considered delivery. So we added all the earthquake book, lead-based paint, and so forth to the bottom of that signing page of the NHD. So when they sign that one docu-signable page in the NHD, the buyer is agreeing that they've read the entire report and accept the parcel as what's been disclosed, and also that they've received all those booklets. But you might want to send them an email attaching the report so they can open those links and just say something like, hey, you might have a sleepless night while we're going through this transaction. So here's a little something to help you get right to sleep. Here's some booklets that you need to read. And if you get the late night munchies, don't chew on the baseboards. They might have lead-based paint according to this booklet. So you can use a little funny, but just send some documentation. Unless you're using a TCN, most of the time they're sending those separate pages, the signing pages of the booklets for the seller and buyer for the seller to send to the buyer and the buyer to sign. You'll notice on the natural hazard disclosure statement where everyone signs that there's no place for a buyer's agent to sign. Did you know by the real estate requirements, no buyer's agent ever has to sign this page? Just the listing agent, the seller, of course, and the buyer. But if your office requires that, we do have 2 signatures for the agents, seller's agents. Sometimes there's co-agents. So you can mark out that seller's agent, the second one, and put buyers if you want and sign there. But it's not necessary. Now, here's where, because the report is live and interactive, if you want to review one portion of that report, we put it in list of categories of everything that's in the report based on the pages where it falls. So the first part is all the statutory natural hazard disclosures that you saw on that first map. The second is the local disclosures, whether it's in or out. And you saw that on the second map on this presentation. So you can simply take your cursor and hover over any section, click on it, and it will take you straight to that section of the report. So let's say your buyer says, hey, it looked like we're in a wildland fire area. Can we go look at that page? And then you can click on that wildland fire area, and it will take you straight to that page in the report so that you can review it with your buyer. And why that's so important is because for the FHDS, as we're going to discuss in detail, both high and very high severity zones and wildland areas are included in that FHDS for disclosure. So just know that. Now let's take a closer look at the FHDS, and I've broken this down into sections so that you can see it a little easier on your screen. But I do want to discuss just briefly that wildfire disaster advisory, the WFDA, which is in every transaction now. But this document is going to become very different for you as a buyer's agent if the seller does not provide the FHDS form and you see on the NHD that the parcel is in a high or very high severity zone. Then it becomes a very different discussion with your buyers. Okay. So let's dive into this FHDS. Can everybody see that? That's a little bit bigger and easier to see. So here's the law parameters. Now, looking at this form, when you pull it in WIN forms, I left everything in red that they changed the last time. I'll be changing this again when they change the form. I was just on the phone with CAR because I was asking about getting recertified because this was supposed to change at the end of the year and add in moderate. They can't come to an agreement yet, so it's not happening yet. But as soon as it does, I'll send out a message to all of our sales executives, and Renita will let you know. She can send you if you have questions, or you can reach out to us. But so far, they haven't added in the moderate, just FYI, even though we thought that was coming. They told us it was. So this applies to, this is called the FHDS, the fire hardening and defensible space. So what that means is fire hardening is the actual home itself. And the things are connected to that home and the deck that make it more susceptible to wildfire and flying embers, or what you've done to protect it so it's not as vulnerable. The defensible space on this form is the vegetation around the home, within 100 feet of all sides of the structures. So notice about the fire hardening disclosure is 1A. The property contains 1 to 4 units. What is that? That's residences, home, regular single family residences. That's condos, townhomes, mobiles in parks or on their own land. So all of that is that 1 to 4 units. The seller is required to complete a TDS, a transfer disclosure statement. There is where if a seller isn't completing a TDS, they're not filling out this form. And as we review this together, you're going to see that a buyer is going to be taking on, in purchasing a home in a fire zone that's required by law to disclose, they're taking on some responsibilities. So that's why the WFDA becomes so important in a discussion if you don't receive this document, because the seller isn't completing a TDS. Number 3, the property is located in a high or very high severity zone. So obviously we know high severity zone being high fire zones and wildland areas. They both apply to the FHDS. And number 4, the improvements on the property were constructed before January 1st, 2010. The improvements, the date there is either the home was built prior to 2010, or maybe someone, the reason it's written that way is someone purchased a home, tore it down to the studs, rebuilt, got permits after January of 2010, then the law would, then it would change for them because, and here's the problem, a lot of agents, and so glad you're on this class, you're smart, you're educating yourself. Some agents do not read the rest of the document. And so here's the part you want to understand about this date. If any of these 4 conditions is not met, the seller does not have to answer the questions in paragraph 2B. So I'm a listing agent on a property and the home was built in 2020. Do they have to fill out this form? Absolutely. Absolutely. They don't have to fill out section 2B. Now let me explain why. A home built prior to 2010, if you've ever walked up to a house and you see those round circles, I wish I could see people's faces. Maybe some agents would show their face. So if you see those round circles that are like ventilation, if you know what I'm talking about, if you don't have anything protecting behind that ventilation, birds, mice, rodents can get through those holes into your attic, right? So some people have wire up behind those ventilation holes, but it's not big enough that an ember traveling over a mile in a wildfire, embers they've proven can travel 5 to 7 miles. Is that crazy? So embers traveling, and you've got an open ventilation or very wide ventilation, they can get right through it and into the attic and start a fire. So these are the list here of things that are in paragraph 2B that it's discussing are things that exist in older homes built prior to 2010. But maybe the seller has done some repairs, replacements, done retrofitting. You're not required to do so to sell your home, but you are required as a seller, if your home was built prior to 2010, to disclose these fire hardening vulnerabilities, which is paragraph 2B. So you see number 1, eave soffit and roof ventilation, where the vents have an opening in an excess of 1/8 of an inch and are not flame or ember resistant. So when I ask that question, like, Renita, is your eave soffit and roof ventilation in an excess of 1/8 of an inch and not flame or ember resistant? A lot of sellers are go, I don't know. So notice how the question says, are you, seller, aware of the following features that make the home vulnerable to wildfire and flying embers? So if I'm not aware, I can check the box no. If I am aware that I have that issue, I'm going to check yes. Number 2, roof covering is made of untreated wood shingles or shakes. This is wood shingles, wood shakes, and treatments, according to CAL FIRE, last less than a year. So if they had their wood roof treated 6 years ago, it's no longer treated. It's no longer going to pass that inspection and say, yeah, it's good. So if you've got a shake roof or a wood roof, you know you got a problem. Probably in a fire zone, it's not an easy thing, but they do exist. So a seller would need to check the box yes if that exists. Combustible landscaping or other materials within 5 feet of the home and under the footprint of any attached deck. What's combustible landscaping and other materials? Wood piles stacked up under the deck or around the house, wood for construction, believe it or not, patio furniture, cushions on your patio furniture, gas barbecue grills. Here's a big one. If you're going to go take a listing and you're talking to the seller prior to the listing, and I'm going to show you a little nugget on how to find out if they're near or in a fire zone ahead of time. But you might want to say to a seller, hey, don't put bark or mulch or that fake tire bark in your planter beds, because they will ask you to pull it out when they come to do the inspection. So don't waste your money. I just put a bunch of bark in my front because I'm in a 0 zone. But I know that I spent some bucks on that bark and the contractors that are the workers that put it in my yard. So I would be upset if I did all that work and then turn around and had to pull it all out because it didn't meet requirements for fire hardening or for defensible space. So no bark or mulch. And I'm going to show you where your seller can get all the information on what they can do. You can use that black dirt, not the black bark, but there's black dirt, or just rake out the planter beds and just get them all cleaned out of the leaves and needles or whatever's in them. They don't expect you to get rid of your patio furniture and your cushions. But if there was a wildfire and you could prepare to leave, they would like you to throw those cushions in the shed or in the garage, take down those sunshades, get any wood around your house away from it, and take your patio furniture and your gas barbecue, pull it away from the house, shut off the gas tank, shut off your gas in your house, that kind of thing. But these are, number 3 is combustible materials and things around the house that could help make it catch fire should there be a wildfire in the area. Single pane or non-tempered glass windows. Lots of homeowners know they have old windows. They would need to check yes if that was the case, and they were not. But if they were not aware, you can always, if you don't know the answer as a seller, you check no, because you're unaware. Loose or missing bird stopping or roof flashing. What's bird stopping? It's stopping birds from building nests, those wires that stick up that stop them from building nests on portions up close to the top of your house. Like usually there's big logs over decks and, out looking out into a beautiful area. Those wires sticking up, if they're missing, then birds can build nests. And so you'd have to disclose that. Most of us know what roof flashing is because we've seen a home inspection or two. So here's a kicker. Your seller has filled this out, given it to the buyer. The buyer had a home inspection and a roof inspection, and now they know the roof's got issues. There's some missing flashing, the roof needs repair or replacement, etc. Now the buyer has new knowledge. So at the time they provided this, they didn't have that knowledge, and now they have it from the home inspection, and that might be some new negotiations. But let's say the buyer walks, and now you've got a new buyer. Your seller is going to want to fill this form out correctly now because they have knowledge that they have missing roof flashing. So that would be important to check that box. Yes, if they know they now have documentation and they need to provide it to a buyer, unless they're going to do the repairs to the roof. Rain gutters without metal or non-combustible gutter covers. What do you have if you don't have gutter covers? You got stuff in your gutters, unless you've got someone like a vigilante cleaning those gutters out every other week. If you don't have non-combustible gutter covers, if a flame, an ember, or several land in the gutter and catch that debris in the gutter that's all dried out, what happens is that can get the gutter really hot and on fire, and it drops down into the flower beds below, which a lot of times if the gutters aren't cleaned out, obviously the flower beds usually aren't either, and then they're full of debris, and then that catches fire, and then it causes the home to be more susceptible to catching fire. So that's why these all issues are fire hardening vulnerabilities. That's what this section of the disclosure helps a seller tell a buyer. Now we're going to look at the other. Let me try to pull us down here. There we go. So now we're going to look at defensible space. That is the vegetation around the home. Again, you've got 100 feet from all sides of your structure or home to defend and protect, and other structures on your property that you want to take care of as well, like sheds and so forth. And within that, you've got a 5-foot perimeter that is very well protected and has very specifics on what needs to be done. And then you've got another 30 feet that's also created in defensible space to protect your home. And then you've got the next 70 feet or up to the property line, whatever that may be. And then you've got the street or the road, making sure that stuff is not growing over in the way of the fire trucks being able to get down that. So you're also responsible to trim along your property line so that they can get down and get to saving homes. So that's the defensible space portion of this, and what a seller's letting a buyer know. So here's what's important. You might receive this disclosure, and I just want to arrow back to the smaller this is the disclosure on the 2 pages. It's 2 pages plus another 2 pages, so it's actually 4. And the other 2 are called the decision tree that's attached to it, and that guides your seller into how to fill this out, by the way. So if you're using anything like SkySlope, they have a platform in SkySlope called Breeze that will help your seller fill it out, or they can use the decision tree. But you'll notice that, I'm sorry, that on this form, if you receive this form, man, it's being sensitive. If you receive this and you only have the top filled out as a buyer's agent, and then it's signed at the bottom, what's happening is there's 2 pieces of default language on this form, and it's automatically defaulting to that default language. So just know that if nothing is checked and no dates, no time frames, then it's going to the default. And the default is, so here we are in the defensible space. And this is where you're in a local compliance requirement. So you either are in a local vegetation management ordinance or you're not. And if you know you are, you're going to check the box is. If you know you're not, you're going to check the box not. Some sellers don't know. And that's just the way it is. So it will default to the B, which is seller is unaware of whether the property is in compliance with applicable state or local defense-based law, and the seller does not have a report prepared by an authorized defensible space inspector. So there's the default, number 1. Number 2 on the default, if you see nothing filled out, is 3C, buyer and seller agreement regarding which party will obtain documentation of compliance. And you see number 1, there's no box to check. The buyer's responsibility, no local ordinance. Buyer shall obtain documentation of compliance with the state defensible space law within 1 year of close of escrow. It auto defaults that. I don't know, and you can have it, Mr. Buyer. That's the auto default. So your buyers, if you're representing the buyer, is taking on those responsibilities if nothing else is filled out on this form, except for one other caveat, which we'll get to. So let's back up. The seller knows they're in a vegetation management zone. And now they're saying, if you look at B2, the property is in compliance with the state or local defensible space law, whichever is applicable. If the state law applies, the seller must have obtained compliance within the last 6 months. So CAL FIRE has 2 different ways that they inspect the property. You're either in a state responsibility area or a local responsibility area. So either the state inspector will come out and look at the property and give you a pass, or the local vegetation will come out and do a check and give you a certificate. If you have that, you're good to go. That's number 2. And then it says the seller will deliver that documentation within X amount of days of the execution of this form. And then they talk about the agreement later, we're going to go over, if the paragraph is checked, which we'll go over in a minute. Or number 3, the property's not in compliance. Now, it's interesting on this one because it says it's not in compliance with state or local defensible space law, whichever is applicable. If the seller has or agrees to obtain a report prepared by an authorized defensible space inspector, seller shall deliver such report to the buyer within 3 or X amount of business days after the execution of this form, whichever occurs last. So this is saying that it's not in compliance, and if the seller has or agrees to obtain. But now we're going to go into what the seller does or does not agree to obtain if they're in a state or local defensible space. So let's move on, because now we know that this C is the default language. So it's giving it to your buyer, and it's giving them up to a year after close of escrow to get that documentation from the fire department. But do you think their insurance will give them that time? Absolutely not. How are we doing on the chat, Renita? Anyone have anything in the chat yet? If you could check. So now let's move on to the second page. And this is where there's some different options here. Number 2, the buyer responsibility. So let's say, no, it's not in compliance. but the local vegetation management ordinance is in effect, which requires compliance as a result of sale of the property. The local ordinance allows either seller or buyer to obtain documentation of compliance. Buyer shall comply with the requirements of the ordinance after close of escrow. So this is where a seller can give off the responsibility to a buyer in a local vegetation management area, which is the local fire department, and they can get that inspection and see what needs to be done. This is where a seller is allowing a buyer to get the documentation. Might be a little tricky because you get the inspection done, you find out a bunch of trees need to be, so there comes some new negotiation if you find out that it did not pass. And as a buyer, if the buyer is being given that responsibility, you're gonna need that in writing, and this is kind of a bit of that in writing. Hey, buyer, I'm giving you the responsibility to get that documentation. Or number three, buyer's responsibility in a local vegetation management ordinance, which does not require compliance as a result of sale of the property. And the buyer shall obtain documentation of compliance with the state defensible space law within a year of close of escrow, or applicable comply with the local requirements after close of escrow. This is the one you're going to see more often than not, where they're saying, here you go, buyer, you take care of it after close of escrow. You don't need the documentation to close, and I'm going to let you take care of it later and find out what the cost would be to create defensible space around the property. Or number four, which is a better thing to see checked, is the seller's responsibility in a local vegetation management ordinance area, which is in effect and requires compliance as a result of sale of the property. Now, you're going to not see this one checked very often because you're not probably selling in Paradise or Truckee. But if you have an area where it's a point of sale, then you're going to see this one checked. And the seller shall obtain documentation of compliance before the buyer's final verification of condition. Number five, seller is taking on the responsibility, but it's not a point of sale, and they have it already. They already have their certificate, and here it is. Or number six, it's the seller's responsibility, and they are agreeing to obtain that compliance and to give the buyer that information at the time of the final verification of condition. So 4, 5, and 6 are pretty nice to see, because that means that the seller is either already has the documentation, or they're getting it done and they're going to provide it, or it's completed. So those are good to see. But remember, again, if nothing is checked, it's going to go to the default language, and the default is, I don't know, and you take it, buyer, you take it on. All right. I wanted to show you an interesting website that you can use for your own purposes. This is not for insurance. This is not for disclosure, but this is CAL FIRE's website. And just take a look at this, and we can look at a live one, and when we're done, if you'd like, I'm happy to pull it up and show you. But you can actually click on these binoculars right here on the left. Right now we're on the legend, which kind of shows us what the codes are. So you've got the yellow is moderate fire zones, which we were told was going to be added next year, but they haven't done so yet. We got to keep our eyes open for a new FHDS. And when they do change that, it'll be when they add the moderate. But for now, everything in the orangish color, the pale orange, is high. And everything in that bright kind of pinkish color is very high. And then you see that really dark red, which is those are hazard viewers for a local response or a state responsibility area. So you'll see those different determinations as you zoom in. You can click on these binoculars, and over where the legend is, actually an address search pops up. Type in the address, the complete address, and it will zoom right into that address and show you if they're in a low, moderate, high, very high. You can see that. So prior to going out on your listing, you can be prepared to talk to your buyer. Hey, we're going to need to provide this form, the FHDS form. And there's some things you're going to have to decide whether you want to get your parcel ready. If you don't have your certificate, if you do, that's wonderful. If you don't, we have to discuss what you want to do and how you want to market this property. Do you want to show that you have done all the things, or do you want to pass that responsibility over to the buyer? A seller's not a horrible person for not wanting to do all the things. Sometimes there's circumstances beyond their control. Maybe they had to move away for a job change, or maybe they're elderly and they're moving into a care facility, or for whatever reason, they can't do all the things that are necessary and are going to pass those on to a buyer. But the important thing is, there are lawsuits over this because buyers did not understand what they were taking on and the cost to create defensible space. So, if anyone's had a tree removed or trimmed lately, how expensive that is. And so sometimes parcels need several trees trimmed up or removed. And you're talking tens of thousands of dollars if it's a lot of tree trimming and tree removal. So that's why there are some lawsuits going on right now in the state of California over that. So it's important, it's imperative for you to understand, to represent to the buyer, hey, these are the requirements in a fire zone. I need you to understand those and read this together and really look at it closely if you want to take that on. I mean, they want to wake up and see trees and flora and fauna and, birds and so forth. So you're buying in an area that you have a risk. They're willing to pay for fire insurance because they want to live in that area. But then it also comes with responsibility. Just like if you have a home with a pool, you got to clean it. You can buy it clean, but it's not going to stay that way. You got to keep up on it. So they have to clean those gutters, rip out those dead plants, trim those trees, do those things for the rest of the time they live there. It'll be their responsibility. So understanding that and where you're buying is very important. It's kind of like, I like to equate it to when you get your driver's license and you get out on the freeway, everyone knows what the speed limit is. Their speed limit signs, the speed limit's usually 65 on the freeway. It slows down in some areas. You've got in town different speed limits. Is everyone driving that speed limit? Heck no. Some people are driving crazy erratic, weaving in and out of traffic. Some are driving slower than they should be, and some are driving the speed limit or close to it. And it's kind of the same with fire and fire mitigation and defensible space. Some people are doing all they can. Some are doing most of what they can, and some are doing nothing. But when everybody is doing what they're supposed to be, everybody's driving the speed limits, that's because there's a police car, a CHP out there monitoring the speeds of people, right? And giving out tickets. And that's what local vegetation management zones are like. They have regular checkups in the neighborhood, annual checkups to see that the homes are, what's done is defensible space has been created. And they check on those and then they tell people, hey, you need to get this fixed. They give them like a fix-it ticket. And then if they don't do something, they give them time. If they don't do it, they'll fine them. And the fines can be tens of thousands of dollars. And if they don't do anything, then they can actually hire a company to go out there and do what's necessary and then put it as a tax lien against their property. So it's not for the faint of heart. And a buyer needs to understand, especially in vegetation management zones, what's required. And so those are, and most sellers know they live in them because they come around and give them a notice or give them a pass and say you've done well, and they have their certificate. If you notice on the AB 38 notice page, and I took a screenshot of that page in our report, we give a very easy way for your seller to get that inspection. There's a link right there to request that defensible space inspection. It goes to the mothership, CAL FIRE, and CAL FIRE will schedule out whichever inspector in that area does those fire inspections for the state. If it doesn't belong to the state, if it's a local vegetation area with local vegetation management zones, they will send that request to the correct fire department, and that department will send out there or email you, or when you fill out the form, email you, hey, we're coming out, we can come out on this day at this time. And they'll negotiate with the owner as to when they're going to do the inspection. But if it's been given, the responsibility's been given to the buyer, can the buyer click on that automatically and schedule that inspection? Or if there's like the default language, it's basically, I'm not doing anything and I'm giving it over to you. Well, according to your residential purchase agreement, you cannot schedule a government inspection on a seller's home, any home, without their written permission. So you need written permission from the seller to be able to click on that link and schedule. When you open that, you'll see it's homeowner's name, it's the address, it's the homeowner's email, it's the homeowner's phone number. So if they've given you written permission, CAL FIRE wants to see that, because they don't want to walk on a property that they're not invited on, unknowing, with the homeowner not knowing they're showing up. They might have a dog that might be protecting their home and so forth. So CAL FIRE wants to see that and meet someone there. And it's really important that you meet them there, because you're not going to, with their sheet they give, it's a little hard to see every tree that needs to be trimmed and all of that. So you need to make sure you, if you have that written permission, that you meet them there, or your seller needs to be there. And then also at the bottom of that page is a link to the defensible space on CAL FIRE's website and how to create that and what they're looking for. On that link, it gives the lists of everything they need. It tells them exactly what they need to do to be ready for the inspector. And they actually have a self-assessment on that link. It's not triggering anything that has CAL FIRE come look at your parcel. It's just simply for the public's protection and information. You can go there and read everything they want, also watch videos, and you can also look at the D-space assessment. So you can take your own personal assessment of your parcel and see how you rate and what you need to do. So that's a really nice link for your sellers to go to and look at. So I wanted to take a picture for you guys. I don't know if you can see all of these, but this is in your RPA. I took a screenshot of the various different areas where this is referenced. The RPA allows the buyer to request the WFDA, and also the FHDS could be under other. When you're requesting other documents, you see here the wildfire disaster advisory is at the top of that section here. And then you can, other would be the FHDS in case maybe a seller's agent didn't get their seller to fill that out yet. But if you receive no TDS because the seller's not doing a TDS, remember, you're not getting the FHDS because there's no one to fill it out. Only a seller can do so. Then the point of sale requirement is the other one that's I took a screenshot of, that's referenced on the residential purchase agreement, page 7, paragraph 2. Whoops, sorry about that. The RPA makes clear who can schedule the inspection. There's the information on, on page 9, section 12, and the timeframes for delivering this form and allocating responsibility of compliance is also in your RPA on page 8E. So those are references that you're, be welcome to look through your residential purchase agreement. I also took a screenshot of the different websites that are helpful links on the CAL FIRE website that we give you the link in the NHD. And so that one that we discussed, the fire hazard viewer, you can go and look at that. And there's the D-space assessment that I mentioned and so forth. Here's a picture of a parcel on the statutory map that fell in a wildland area. So, and I wanted to show you this because these poor folks needed fire insurance and flood insurance. They're in a FEMA mapped area and a fire area, which happens from time to time. Someone's got a creek running down through their property, and that might be there. So if you do notice that, here's 2 things to remember. If it's in a wildland area, go to the summary pages like I showed you earlier, click on the wildland, because we're going to do a deep dive and determine whether or not it's low, moderate, high, or very high. If it is high or very high, it'll be in red. You're going to need to use the FHDS, the same as if it's in a very high fire severity zone. It's just mapped differently by CAL FIRE. And by law, we need to tell you those differences. We don't combine them together. That happens sometimes with some NHDs, and that is not what you're supposed to do. So we provide them separately, but you do need to go to that page to look at the wildland fire to see what it's determined. Super easy to look at. I can walk you through that anytime if you need. But here, I also wanted to show you, because this particular parcel falls in a FEMA map zone. And if your seller falls in a FEMA map zone, anytime they fall in a FEMA map zone, Disclosure Source is automatically going to pay for, order, and send you with your NHD the flood cert. And that flood certification is going to tell you some interesting and important information. One of those is whether or not they've had a LOMAC, a letter map of change. That letter map of change is maybe they had an elevation survey done years ago when they built, or maybe later, and they wiped out the flood insurance, or they could greatly reduce the cost of flood insurance. So that's a really nice factor to have, because it's good for the lender to see it. On this particular one, it didn't wipe out the flood insurance, it's only reduced. So it's less likely to flood. I have a case in point. My neighbor just built 2 wings onto the back of his house, and he has a creek running behind his house. But he had an elevation survey done. It cost him about $2,600, but he was building on it. He had to get it done. It wiped out his flood insurance completely because he had enough elevation. So keep that in your hip pocket. You never know when you take a listing and someone's got flood insurance and you're like, why? Oh, because we have that creek running behind our house, and that's FEMA mapped. So you might be able to give a little nugget there. It might not be that expensive for an elevation survey, but I've had agents, even agents, tell me we had flood insurance for years. After I heard your presentation, we got a land surveyor out. It cost us $800. It wiped out our flood insurance. So you still might even want it, but it's way less expensive when you have that elevation survey. So just know that that's also attached. It is not embedded into the NHD. That's not part of your natural hazard and not required. We purchase that and attach it separately only when the parcel hits a FEMA mapped area and it's required. So we provide that as well for you and for your buyer's education. Hey, want to get some more business, repeat business? So who hasn't had a buyer call you after close of escrow and say, what's this bill that I received? What is this? I got a tax bill. I thought our taxes were paid in escrow. So inside the natural hazard, remember it's live and interactive, you can simply type the sell price, not you, excuse me, sidebar, your buyer, because you don't give tax advice. So your buyer, you can have a little fun with them with the NHD and say, hey, let's see what your supplemental tax bill is. What that means is this: the seller has owned this house for a while. Here's their taxes, and you're buying it here. So there's a difference between what you are going to be paying in taxes and the current owner is paying. Your taxes are being collected from every 6 months and paid out of escrow. Yes, with your house payment, they're collecting those. But there is a separate tax bill called the supplemental tax. It's the difference between those two. And that's going to come to you like a baby. You don't know when. It could be twins. They might divide it into 2, rarely triplets. So just be aware that when it comes, you're going to need to pay that separately. It's not part of your property taxes. So go ahead, let's calculate it. You can type in the sale price that you've got accepted. And then there's 2 arrows in the pop down of January through May or June through December. You click on the arrow. It wouldn't show on my sample screenshot, but you click that and it lets you click the month you're closing and automatically calculates that bill for you. So how easy is that? But then you could put in the reminder to call that person, that buyer, back a few months later, just to remind them, hey, Renita, how are you? You have that nice conversation. The reason for my call is you were on my mind, or I was thinking about you. I wanted to remind you about the tax bill that we discussed when we reviewed the NHD, and then it's going to come, and I don't want it to be a shock to you. So I wanted to give you a quick reminder. You calculated it, and I think it was, $1,869 or 2, but it's an estimate. But just be aware, if you were to receive a rebate check from escrow, you want to save that money because it's probably going to help go towards this supplemental tax bill that'll come. Now, if you'd like, I wrote a script for you. Of course, you can write it, make it your own, but there's a script that I can send to you, or Renita can send to you if you'd like, on that supplemental tax bill. Good way to say, oh, by the way, who do you know who could use my services to help buy or sell real estate? I'd love to help your friends and family and coworkers. So why disclosure source? Why choose? You've got choices. We respect that. And there are many, many companies out there to choose from. But did you know that natural hazard disclosure companies are not regulated? Is that crazy? I mean, you're all regulated by the DRE, and by the board if you belong to a local board. But NHD companies are not regulated. So it really matters because we stand behind every report with $60 million in errors and emissions. You've got Renita and myself to help you with any questions you have. And you want someone that's got your back. And we actually cover and protect all parties in the transaction. We cover the transaction coordinator, your broker, you, the other agent, everyone in the transaction. So when you're thinking about which natural hazard is the best, go to the source, disclosure source. Well, thank you for having us. And if you would like, and if you have time, I'm going to try to go back to the, where's the exit button? Sorry, I can't find it. I got to try to exit. There we go. I pulled up, I have in my emails a video that was sent from CAL FIRE. I'm going to try to find it. Here it is. And if you have a moment, it's a 5-minute video, and I think you would enjoy it. Let me just screen share. Because this is, CAL FIRE has been attending.
Hello, I'm Chief Heather McCulley, Division Chief for CAL FIRE's Defensible Space.
Can you hear
Program.
that?
Our team is here to guide you through the who, what, when, where, why, and how CAL FIRE's defensible space laws relate to real estate transactions. We are not lawyers or legal representatives. We are simply providing guidance on real estate inspections. I'm Natasha Fouts, Fire Prevention Specialist for CAL FIRE's Defensible Space Program. Let's start with the why. Why has California enacted laws that now require disclosures and compliance with defensible space laws in high fire risk areas? The unique combination of climate, vegetation, and human factors has made California one of the most fire-prone regions in the world. The state's long, dry summers and strong, hot winds, such as the Santa Ana winds in Southern California, create ideal conditions for fires to ignite and spread rapidly. Over the years, California has seen numerous catastrophic fires that have resulted in loss of life, destruction of communities, and significant damage to the environment. One of the most devastating is the Camp Fire, which started in November 2018 in Butte County. It became the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California's history, claiming the lives of 85 individuals and destroying almost 19,000 structures, including the entire town of Paradise. CAL FIRE has implemented various measures to prevent and mitigate wildfires to combat this ongoing crisis. These include improved defensible space building codes for fire-prone homes, increased fire suppression and prevention funding, and public education campaigns to raise awareness. Defensible space coupled with home hardening is essential to improve a home's chance of surviving a wildfire. In California, real estate disclosure laws and inspection requirements are in place to protect buyers and hold sellers legally liable for failure to share information about the condition and hazards of a property. Just as a seller would disclose if a property were in a flood or earthquake zone, they also must disclose if it's in a high fire risk area. The catastrophic fires in California's history make compliance with defensible space laws a must for residential real estate transactions in high or very high fire hazard severity zones. Real estate agents should act as advocates for their clients, whether they're buying or selling a property. Completing these inspections and disclosures will protect both the buyer and the seller and help make Californians ready for wildfire.
Hello, I'm Melissa Curtis, Battalion Chief for the Defensible Space Program. I'll discuss the what. Specifically, what is Civil Code 1102.19 and what it means to you. Beginning July 1st of 2021, Civil Code Section 1102.19 requires the seller of a property that's located in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone to provide buyers with documentation that the property is in compliance with defensible space requirements, or what we refer to as Public Resources Code 4291, or local vegetation management ordinances. This law also allows that if the documentation of compliance cannot be obtained by the close of escrow, the seller and buyer can enter into a written agreement that the buyer agrees to obtain documentation of compliance within 1 year close of escrow. The fire hardening and defensible space disclosure and addendum, referred to as the FHDS, will be required if the property meets the following conditions. First, it's considered residential property that contains 1 to 4 units. Second, the sellers are required to complete a real estate transfer disclosure statement. And third, if the property is located in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. Questions and issues regarding property insurance can be submitted to the California Department of Insurance website at insurance.ca.gov. Insurance is considered a private industry and CAL FIRE has no regulatory control or influence. Information on the California FAIR Plan can also be obtained here. So who is responsible? While most of California is subject to degree of some fire hazards, specific features make some areas more hazardous. Fire hazard severity zones reflect the zones in California that are vulnerable to wildfire. These zones fall into the following classifications: moderate, high, and very high. The seller is responsible for obtaining the documentation of compliance. Those that need an inspection are those properties that are located in the high or very high fire hazard severity zones. You can use the fire hazard severity zone map to locate your property and determine which zone your home is in. You can access the map online at fire.ca.gov/dspace and select the request for a real estate defensible space inspection option.
I'm Jory Feldman, a fire prevention specialist with CAL FIRE's Defensible Space Program. And I know what you're asking. When should I schedule an inspection? Well, you should request an inspection as soon as possible. Inquiries for an inspection can take some time depending on the local defensible space inspector's workload. I recommend the moment the property is listed and placed on the market before the escrow process begins. This not only gives the inspector adequate time to plan an inspection, it gives the seller time, if any violations are found, to become compliant and re-inspected. The inspection is valid for up to 6 months. Now we'll discuss where you can go to request an inspection. The process is quick and easy. First, you visit www.fire.ca.gov/dspace. At the top of the page, you will select Request a Real Estate Defensible Space Inspection. This will direct you to a quick survey. You will begin by finding out if your property requires an inspection. Select the link to the fire hazard severity zone map. When the map opens, click the binoculars to enter the address. If your property resides in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone, return to the survey. If you reside in Marin, Los Angeles, Orange, Santa Barbara, or Ventura County, select the provided links to request an inspection. If you don't live in one of these counties, scroll to the bottom of the page and click Next. Here you will enter your name, phone number, and email address and answer whether the person will be present for the inspection and if that person's the property owner, agent, or tenant. Click Next when finished. On the next page, you will enter your address. Verify that the home identified on the map is where the inspection should occur. If needed, adjust the location icon so it's directly over the house. Once finished, click Submit. It's that easy. Remember, only property owners can request an inspection from a government agency. If you have any issues, click the support link at the bottom of the survey, and this will allow you to email our team so we can address your situation.
I'm Randy North, the Battalion Chief for CAL FIRE's Defensible Space Program. I will discuss how a seller can prepare their property for a defensible space inspection. Defensible space is a buffer created between a building on a property and the grass, trees, shrubs, or any other wildland area that surrounds it. This space is needed to slow or stop the spread of wildfire, and it helps protect the home from catching fire, either from embers, direct flame contact, or radiant heat. Proper defensible space also provides firefighters a safe area to work in to defend a home. Flying embers are responsible for destroying the majority of homes during wildfire. So removing all the combustible vegetation and other items within 5 feet is extremely important. Science has proven the ember-resistant zone to be the most critical of all the defensible space zones. This zone is referred to as Zone 0. It includes the areas under and around all attached decks and requires the most stringent wildfire fuel reduction. Zone 0 is designed to keep fires or embers from igniting materials that can spread the fire to a home. Zone 1 and Zone 2 make up the 100 feet of defensible space required by law. Start at the home and work outward to 100 feet or to the property line, whichever is closer. The intensity of fuel management varies within the 100 feet perimeter of the home, with more intense fuel reduction occurring closer to the home. Don't wait till a fire is approaching. The appropriate time is before a fire threatens the community. CAL FIRE self-assessment tool can be used to determine how to prepare a home for wildfire. This tool can be found by visiting www.fire.ca.gov/DSpace and select Check Your Readiness. Property owners can also visit readyforwildfire.org for additional information.
Can a home or community survive an oncoming wildfire before the fire department arrives? This is why defensible space should be important to everyone. Together, we can make Californians ready for wildfire.
All right. So that was a good video and helps you understand what CAL FIRE is
Yeah.
requiring. So thank
No,
you.
I like that. I like visuals.
I do
So thank
too.
you.
So you're welcome. I think I gotta get my
Thank you everybody for joining today. We really appreciate it.